Hey, welcome in. I'm Rita, and this is the story I'm telling myself. If you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, you are not alone. Let's get into it. Hello, everyone. It's another Tuesday, and that means it's another episode of the story I'm telling myself. And I'm so excited to introduce all of you who do not already know her to Dalia Feldheim. Dalia, welcome. Thank you for saying yes to being here.
Yeah, lovely to be here and great to connect with you again, Rita.
Yes. And we haven't been in the same room together for a while, and we need to remedy that. We need to figure out where we're going to meet up again. But I just can't say enough about how smart and impressive Dalia is. And so having you on the podcast to share your story with everyone. For those of you that do not know, Dalia has a book out, Dare to Lead Like a Girl. It is an awesome playbook about leadership that you need to add to your shelves if you do not already have that book. But that's as much intro as I'm going to do. Dalia, you tell everybody what you want them to know about who you are.
Wow, who I am. So, I started off studying psychology and business, and straight out of university, took a role with Procter & Gamble. I spent 17 years with P&G. I thought it was, I call it my years of flow because P&G was very good with people. I very quickly understood, the term flow, Mikai Chik Mikai kind of coined it as really when you're completely aligned with your mission and your purpose. And I knew very early on that my purpose was about empowering people, and P&G enabled me, both as a marketing director. I had a great team and we were encouraged to spend 50% of our time coaching and training. But also in the campaigns that we did, one of the most well-known one is Always Run Like a Girl, another women empowerment campaigns. But also I became a training junkie. I love training and coaching. So I led a lot of courses for P&G. I worked with them 17 years, Singapore, Geneva, Moscow. In 2015, I was asked to move back to Geneva from Singapore. At that time, my husband opened a startup, and I decided to put my money where my mouth is on dual career. And we decided to part, not my husband and I, but P&G and I. But honestly, it felt like a divorce because I was so aligned with the company culture. But I took another role as CMO of another Fortune 500 company, and we'll talk about it later today. But that was when I learned the good, the bad, and the ugly of leadership. And I stayed there for 3 years. That was the ugly in the other company. And when I left, I said to myself, what a waste of human potential. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And so I decided to pivot my career, became an organizational psychologist and a positive psychologist. And that's where you and I met, Rita. And
Yes.
Positive psychology retreat. Where was it? Milan, I think. No, Como.
Yes. Oh no, you're right. It was Como. Yeah, we were in Como.
So, and since then I've been working with organization, bringing purpose and joy back into the workplace. I have a little startup, game for teaching positive psychology. I'm an external consultant for Deloitte on culture and people, and on a mission to humanize the workplace.
Which is where you and I intersect, and we both share this passion and this love of making workplaces places that really bring the best out of each individual. And so if you want to connect with Dalia, and I know you will after this conversation, she would love to connect with you over on LinkedIn. So I've dropped that in the chat, and that will be in the show notes as well. Gary, thanks for joining us from the UK. If you are in the house with us, if you are listening, jump into your comments and say hello to Dalia. Welcome her to the show and let us know that you're there. And then we want to engage with you throughout this conversation. So don't hesitate to add your thoughts and your questions as this conversation progresses. But we're going to talk about something that a lot of people have experience with, but maybe haven't really had a positive experience talking about, which is toxic bosses. So Dalia, walk us into your story of your life and time in dealing with a toxic boss.
Well, I guess, I told you about the beginning in Procter & Gamble, and I had, only leaders that believed in me, sometimes more than I believed in myself. And my career just went from strength to strength, right? But it wasn't until I reached the lowest point of my career that I really understood the importance of, your direct manager, right? On your well-being, on your performance, and on your ROI. And so that was when I moved to the second company. And never mind the name, you can find it on LinkedIn. Great company, really. I loved the CEO, the CMO, everything looked amazing. It seemed like a dream role. I was there to kind of completely transform the marketing organization, hire 150 people, a dream role, right? 1 month into the job, I got a new boss, and it took me a week to realize that, how can I put it politely? Him and I are like fire and water. So I'm the fire. If you haven't told yet, I'm all about people and creativity and positivity. And he was all about numbers and scorecard and ROI, as should be, but very aggressively. So the culture was very much ROI or you die. And I remember, one of the first discussions, he told me, I'm not going to tell you what you're good at. I find it a total waste of time. I'm only going to focus on what you need to fix. And I was like, okay. And then he kind of added, oh, and there's no art in marketing. It's only science. You just didn't get it yet. So I don't know if anyone here listening is for marketing, but for me, it felt like a stab and turn. Anyway, the big kind of...
I'm gonna pause you right there just for a minute. I want to say welcome, Jerry and Debbie. And this is a connection point for our listeners, I think. If you've ever had a boss that says, I'm here to fix your problems. Mm-hmm. I'm not here to lift you up and to tell you what you're good at. I'm just here to let you know all the ways that you are not good enough. Yeah. You might have had this experience with a toxic boss.
I think the thing for us, and we'll get to talk to, the main topic for today that we want to talk about around imposter syndrome. But I think there's something very interesting happening. So I'll tell you the story and then a little bit, but the sad news, and lovely to see all you guys joining. The sad news that almost 1 in 4 of you experience toxic bosses, toxic environments. That's the statistics. It's that bad. It's hysteric. And very sad. So I'll share with you a little bit my story and the work that I currently do with organizations. But, basically kind of I walked into, okay, I'm going to tell you what you're not good at. So one day he calls me into his office.
And let's just be clear here. You were a highly successful executive at this point.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we talked about in titling this episode is, if you're a strong, powerful, capable person, can you fall victim to imposter syndrome? And this vision that you had of yourself was of high capacity and capability when you met this boss.
Yeah.
And but I think that changed, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's really interesting because I think what happened to me, how I shriveled, despite 17 years of being top rated in P&G. I mean, it can't be a fluke or luck, right? If that happened to me after 17 years, what would people, who fall into kind of a toxic boss as their first boss? I don't think I would have reached, a tenth of what I reached to in my career. But anyway, long story short, he called me into the office one day and he started giving me feedback. And, I love feedback. We used to call it tough love, right? Feedback should be honest and direct, no sugarcoating, right? But there was no love in the room that day. It was only tough and denigrating and humiliating and belittling. And I'm a C-suite woman by this stage, right? The only woman on his C-suite team. So I'm holding it in, right? But then he starts insulting my team. And I don't know about you, but that's when I became a lioness because, I was so frustrated and it was so unfair. They worked so hard. Now, for me, when I become frustrated, I have a very automatic reaction, okay? A tear appears in my eye. It was never a barrier. In P&G, I actually had a boss that, told me, emotions are sign of passion and not a weakness, right? But here I was in the room with a tear in my eye, and he smiles, and he gives me a box of tissue, and I kind of remember my first bosses and their support, and then I see a weird thing about his smile as he turns around the tissue box. And I can't believe my eyes. On the other side of that tissue box was a handmade sticker he prepared in advance, which read, Dalia's tissue box. Meaning he knew, he prepared, he wanted to do everything to make me cry, and he found it a very funny joke. And I was like, literally, are you kidding me? This is an HR assault. And he kind of leaned back and he's like, oh, Dalia, stop being so emotional. It's just boy banter. Now, the interesting thing there, right? And I'll share something that I don't often kind of share, but where not only was he kind of bullying me on one-on-one, but a few days later I was arguing or having a discussion with some of my peers, and he passes by and he says, "Oh, you think Dalia is such a tough cookie? She has a tissue box with her name on it in my office." So it was kind of very, he was very congruent, if you like, with his meanness. And I can tell you, I was always told, I was always a high performer, but I was always told that I'm really good in managing up, right? So I kind of said to myself, okay, Dalia, you're a smart lady, you're not going to give up. I'm not a quitter. I used to be a gymnast. We don't quit. I kept on saying, why should I quit? He should quit, right? I'm going to change him. That was kind of my mantra. That was a story. I was like, yes, I'm a victim. I didn't even call the situation bullying, and that's an important point. We'll get back to at the end. But I was like, Dalia, come on, you're stronger than that. Don't let it get to you. And I really tried everything in my toolkit to manage up. But I realized that, slowly, these little microaggressions, that was probably the biggest one. But after that, a lot of small, niggling came along. And I remember, and that's really something to watch out, because we kind of think, oh, I'm a strong woman. I can handle this, right? I can handle this. And these things start piling up. And what happened to me is I found myself literally, losing my confidence. Suddenly, I mean, he would literally tell me, you're not as good as you think you are or you were. A lot of it was lack. You talk about, imposter syndrome, right? Imposter syndrome is when you account success externally, okay, luck, great team, whatever, and you account failure internally, right? And he was literally, I never felt imposter syndrome in my life before, right? I kind of consider myself quite kind of accomplished and high confident. I used to be gymnast, I know it's a lot about hard work, but the way kind of he was at it, and it was really a game for him. At some stage, after kind of a year of handling this, I'm like, why do you need to stab and turn? Isn't stabbing just enough? I tried humor and everything, right? And he's like, yeah, you keep coming back. I knock you down and you keep coming back again. And I said, well, is it a game for you? She says, sure. Aren't you enjoying this? And I was like, oh my God, so anyway, this went on for 3 years. And we talk a lot now as a kind of positive psychologist, right? I know all about, the fight, flight. I tried everything, right? Maybe the first year was freeze. And then when I kind of got back to my senses, it was fight. I was given feedback, I was volunteering, very open, very congruent. I got feedback that I'm too good with my people, I'm too creative, and I'm too positive. This you will love, Rita, and I got the nickname.
And these were supposed to be bad things.
Yes.
And this feedback was this was what was getting in your way. This is the feedback you were receiving.
All my strengths that historically were strengths were not only not appreciated, but totally denigrated. So, but the thing about this, and this is where I want to focus, I stayed there for 3 years. Partially I was the main breadwinner, partially I almost had a cape on me because, headhunter that placed me in the role said to me, oh, we know he's an asshole. He has a reputation. You're the only one who can change him. And suddenly, everyone was coming with complaints, and I became the Jacques d'Arc or whatever, the kind of the brave one that always spoke up. And the more resilient I became, the more aggressive he became. And it really became what later researchers call the dance of death, right? Because he just wanted appreciation. And I fell into something I called wounded femininity. I mean, let's talk about that a little bit because we're approaching International Women's Day. So,
can I pause you before we jump into wounded femininity?
Some great points here.
Yeah, I just want to say, hey, Bobby, thanks for joining us. I love what Debbie said. You might have a toxic boss if they ever said, put on your big girl panties.
Oh my God.
Right? Like, you should, this idea that asking for help is a deficit versus asking for help being a strength. Because I know in your leadership training and in my leadership training, we train asking for help is a strength, right?
And I see Debbie was asking her, so your bully boss was a woman. We actually see bullies appear in men and women alike, right?
Yes,
So
yes.
yeah, there's a lot. And we can't change someone that doesn't want to change. I think that was a painful, like I really tried everything, freeze, fight, flight, second year I kind of avoided. And that's when I dropped into my wounded femininity. So Raj Sisodia, who's also a close friend, right? Talks, he's the founder of conscious capitalism. He coined the phrase wounded masculinity and wounded femininity. So what does it mean? I mean, and it's not about women and men in any way. And my book, Lead Like a Girl, has nothing to do women versus men. The idea is that we have positive feminine leadership traits, okay? Empathy, intuition, teamwork, and positive masculine leadership traits, direction, logic, assertiveness, right? A leader must rotate between the two. A good leader has to have both. However, when we're in a toxic environment, one of two things can happen. Either we fall into our toxic masculinity, okay, where it's power over people versus power with people. Often bullies are people that have been bullied in the past. And so they fall into this wounded masculinity. And my boss literally told me at some stage, I was bullied as a child. I realized if I don't bring other people down, I won't survive, okay, in one moment of honesty. So that's the wounded masculinity. But we also have the wounded femininity, okay? When we lose our confidence, when we start, accounting external validation, right? Counting only, like, why would I care what one person thinks about me, right? Why would it be so affecting, right? But it did. And so you see either these women falling into a bitch boss like yours, Debbie, or what happened to me, I fell into this wounded femininity where I was so, it was so important for me that he liked me, that he appreciated me, that, that I prove him wrong. And that became my obsession without saying, what the fuck, right? Sorry for my French. So I think that's kind of, a really important point, and we can talk more about imposter syndrome. But really, for me, 3 years I was there. And I started to doubt myself, right? Year one, I said freeze, fight, flight. End of year two, I literally avoided confrontation. I write an email took me 8 times the time because, I knew he was scrutinize every word. So you're wasting all this energy, right? Literally.
And that is a big thing, right? What this does to there's the mental load, there's the emotional load, and then to collectively what that does to your energy. Yeah. Because it really begins to, the woundedness is your passion. He was attacking you at your place of passion.
Yeah, completely.
In a very targeted way.
I love that you say that, because the way out is also through the passion and your strengths. So for me, the way out. So as I said, 3 years I was there, freeze, fight, flight, tried everything in my toolkit. What really saved me was in the beginning of year 3, I attended a P&G alumni event. Okay. So my previous company. And literally I walked into a huge hall, and I think it was Gary. Yeah, you spoke about servant leadership. And I remember I walked in, and everyone on stage was talking about servant leadership, take care of your people, and the business takes care of itself. And, all these values that I grew up in. And I remember literally sitting there and saying, oh my God, I became a frog in boiling water. Okay. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Have you heard the term before? It's so accurate. These little nibblings. I'm a strong woman. I can handle this. I'm a strong, so you're kind of ignoring it, and you become numb to the fact that you're a frog in boiling water. And I literally,
it's reshaping you, how you're showing up in that space in these little tiny ways that add up, but it's not like you were consciously deciding to move that far, right?
No,
and Gary was step and the next step.
You can't change. You can only focus on yourself. And I realized I stopped believing in myself. I stopped believing in my strengths. So, there and then, it was in Cincinnati in a P&G alumni. I said, I'm going to leave by the end of the year, but not before I come back to my strengths. Okay. And that decision, literally two decisions. One, fear. Why should I have fear in the workplace? The worst they can do is fire me. So I dropped fear completely. I'll tell you a story. There was he wanted science and to win awards, and I literally was determined to bring my heart and my art and my strengths to the workplace. And so I focused on building an amazing team, and together with my team we created a campaign that was very data driven but also very creative, right? And when that campaign won Effie Award for business results and creativity, I knew I found back my mojo, right? But it was really focusing on myself, reminding myself that taking care of people is a superpower, that being emotionally sensitive is a superpower, right? It's, a sign of passion and not a weakness. Being creative is a superpower, and also being positive is a superpower, right? So I literally, and I picked myself up and, created this campaign. And when it won, I realized, okay, it's time to leave. But I really said to myself, people ask me, you 17 years, top rated in P&G, how could you let one person get to it? And that's when I really understood the power of imposter syndrome. It is extremely toxic. It's extremely strong, right? And the only way to overcome imposter syndrome is to remind yourself of your strengths. And now it's grounded in research. There's great research done in INSEAD Business School. I think it brings the topic to life because they saw that women and men start MBA equally, right? But somehow during the competitive 2 years, women fall behind men. And Zoe, I can't remember the full researcher name, but she decided to try several interventions. And the one that was the most successful, she basically asked students to focus on their strengths. Before every challenging tasks, she asked them to remind themselves of their strengths and solve the challenge from a position of their strengths, realizing everyone has a gift and it's okay that it's not the same gift. You can be very data-driven. That's amazing. I am also data-driven, but I think holistically, okay? I will get to the numbers, but for me, it's the end, how we get to it makes all. So basically, she was teaching the students, men and women, to think about their strengths. And what they found, that was the cohort that men and women finished equal, despite the very.
Oh, so interesting.
So it's really, when I work with, organizations today, the first thing is remind yourself of your strengths, okay? Write down for yourself, 3 reasons that prove your previous, first of all, write down your success, write down your strengths, and 3 reasons that prove that those success weren't a fluke, right? You literally need to, post-rationalize yourself that it's not, you have imposter syndrome. First of all, know that it's very common. 50% of men and 70% of women have imposter syndrome, okay? At some stage.
Yeah, and it may not be all the time.
No, at some stage.
It will come and go. But I want to get to Gary's question in a minute. But before we do that, let's talk about this for a second. So what are the clues that you would give people to identify, maybe this is imposter syndrome?
I thought you were saying, what's the clues for toxic environment, which is also a good question because often we don't notice, right?
Well, if you want to do that one first and then move on.
Maybe, because that's also really important, because I literally kept on thinking, it's just, he's a tough boss, I'll handle. And it was one of my direct reports. I shielded my team. They didn't see anything of it, right? But only one that was co-located with me once said, Dalia, this is not right. Write down everything you've experienced. And I sat down and I filled up 4 pages within a second.
Wow.
And I sent it to 2 people, my husband and my first boss in P&G, Jim. And he called me the next day and he's like, Dalia, this is bullying. And that was the first time when he used the words that I was willing to admit, because we have a cognitive dissonance. I'm a strong woman. I'm not a victim of bullying, right? So we kind of say, I'm not, but admitting and putting language to it is really important for awareness. That's the first thing I wanted to say. So what is bullying? It's not just general challenge. It's when it's consistent, at least 6 months, when it's deliberate, and usually when there's a power difference, right? So it's deliberately to hurt you. So I think that's the first thing. You need to literally write down the situations and understand that they are deliberate. There's a hurt element. It's not just an argument. Sometimes we take things personally, but it's all about the business. So you need to also differentiate between that. Imposter syndrome is really when you kind of start doubting, as I was mentioning, you start saying success is external and failure is internal. And you start, the fact that someone doesn't appreciate you, okay, you start seeing it as a failure. No, right? And Gary was so much, it took only towards the end when I said to myself, this is bullying, he is a bully. I was able to get this emotional detachment from blaming myself, right? Gary was asking
Right.
how much of what we describe can be attributed to a lack of balance between EQ and IQ. And I think that's a beautiful point. I love, the work on EQ versus IQ. And really what we're seeing is that IQ, when you look at kind of managers, it accounts for only 33% of your success. When you talk about leaders, okay, Daniel Goldman, when you talk about leaders, it's only 15% of your success. The majority of your success as a leader is EQ. You don't manage the business, you manage the people that manage the business. And that's why today, that's my passion, right? It's always been, but I just experiencing it myself. I saw at the end of the day, all leaders everywhere, okay, are about reaching the bottom line, growing the bottom line, right? Well, that's what business is about. However, so many leaders get it wrong, thinking, the style of leadership, fear-led leadership, I call it, right, will get them quick. And yes, fear does deliver results short term, okay?
Right.
But it kills your results long term, right? Because people so and my bully boss once said, you think I don't care? For me, care is giving you the maximum bonus every year, okay? And yeah, some people are motivated by external, extrinsic, but very few. The majority of us need to feel felt, seen, appreciated, challenged. My bosses in P&G were not easy on me in any way, right? Their standards were super high, but the approach was, this is where you need to get to. Dalia, I know you can get there, and I'm here with you all the way, versus, this is what you're not doing well, this is what you need to fix, etc. constantly. I mean, the approach was, it was funny, one of his passion areas was Six Sigma. I don't know if everyone knows what Six Sigma is all about, but it's basically a methodology to investigate the past. Now, I'm very into learning from the past to grow in the future, okay? But he was like, okay, this works for people as well. And it's very different. I mean, if you're only looking at your mistakes, okay, and not looking at your strengths first, our brain anyway is wired for negativity. So if you're just, I like to use the sailboat analogy, right? Your strengths are your sails, hole in your sail or weaknesses. You can't ignore them. Yeah, you need to hire for your weaknesses. But if you don't raise your sail, you're not going anywhere. So that's a little bit kind of also on strengths-based leadership. And
yeah, well, what's interesting about what you're saying about him applying Six Sigma is we have historically, from the time of the Industrial Revolution, applied engineering methodology to all parts of the business, including people. And it sort of worked when we were a manufacturing-based society. But at least in the US, we are no longer a manufacturing-based society.
All around the world,
we're relying on intellectual capital, which means people really have to have their human needs met. And that's what the current leadership needs to be about, is really understanding human-centered kinds of leading versus this engineering.
No, you're completely right. And that's why I kind of called my book Lead Like a Girl. It's, of course, a provocation. It's a homage to the Always Run Like a Girl that I led for P&G. But it's basically about the idea that in the 70s, this kind of machine focus may have made sense. But today, where agility, creativity, psychological safety, you won't get, to creativity if you don't understand. First of all, consumers need better. If you don't work in a team, if you're not able to kind of pivot, so the EQ becomes so much more important, today versus ever before. First, then we have all the elements of uncertainty. I started my work in 2018, right? Then came COVID and global warming and wildfire, and now AI and information overload. And, in the eye of the storm, if you're not able to go back to your core, right, that's when you get lost. And, I just did an article now about, culture and AI. We're spending billions into AI innovation without spending into the culture that will enable the psychological safety for employees to fail, to learn, right? Our dear friend Tal says we learn to fail or we fail to learn, right? So
yes,
so that's really important today.
Jerry talked about how your wind of femininity explanation really was resonating with her, and how draining it felt, and so draining that it was just easier, she says in her second comment, to give into the imposter syndrome. And I think this is also a really good clue, is really recognizing your energy level.
Yeah.
If work should be an energy source.
Yeah.
Right. And so if work is not an energy source, then you are not operating from your center of power. And instead of looking outside of you, what you need to do is adopt what Dalia did, which is look inside of you. That in organizations, most people do like a quarterly performance update kind of meeting with their boss, where they sit down and they talk about what progress have you made, how are you doing on your goals, all of those kinds of things. But you need to do that for yourself. You need to say, who am I being? Who do I want to be? Where is that for me? And really know yourself and be true to yourself. So taking stock for you and choosing to really own your agency is so critical in your ability to find that flow and that energy again.
Yeah, if it's hard, it's probably something is wrong. And I can tell you, the moment I realized, first of all, I was completely burnt out, completely. They were almost like I went to one yoga retreat and I was just, a shadow of myself. Friends were like, we don't recognize, the confident Dalia. And then one day, I went to a HR meeting, and it's to a talent review, and global HR came, and it was her first meeting, and he was on his best behavior, according to me, right? Bullies and kind of, they're very good at that, right? But I thought he was on his best behavior. She was shocked with how he talked to me. And she said it to my HR. And then I realized, whoa, I really became numb. I became numb to realizing. And the last kind of straw, where we had a big meeting where my directors, my direct reports, I was CMO, we were to present the annual review. And I said, okay, I'm not going to present. I really believe it was an amazing year. The thing that held me for 3 years, I loved my team. I loved what I was doing. They were a source of energy. Okay. So I focused, on what gives me energy. And that was my people, the creativity. When I decided to go back to my strengths, that started building me up. And we had great results. And I had them prepare like crazy because he was very anal. We gave a stellar presentation. Honestly, jaw-dropping presentation. And they worked so hard, 4 of them. And at the end of the presentation, he looks at them and he says, I think your targets were too low. 2 of them broke into tears, like literally. 2 very senior, right? Directors. Now they haven't seen, they didn't know anything of, as I was saying, I was shielding them. And then I realized, okay, I can't shield them anymore, right? It's time I leave. But of course I had an exit interview, because I think that's also really important. Once you realize, that you fell to imposter syndrome, You go back to your strengths. Once you realize that there's toxic environment, you need to speak up. And I think, what motivated me is realizing I'm not speaking up for myself. There was still fear there. I remember I said, I'm going to talk with the global CEO, but only after I left, right? And I kept on reassuring myself, I'm not doing it for myself, right? I'm doing it for the next generation. And I ended up doing a TED Talk. And before going on stage, my legs were shaking. Those who really look at the TED can see the first 2 seconds, because I was like, what if he would see it? What would he say? And I'm sure he probably saw it. And I had to say to myself, it's not about me and it's not about him. He left for retirement. I wish him all the best. All the best. Well, at the end of the day, it's low self-awareness, low IQ. Until the day I kind of hope to get a phone, I realized I was wrong. But that's completely, bullshit, because wanting to change, because people need to want to change. And I think, what I can do today, and that's why it became my mission, to humanize the workplace so that women and men thrive, is really to raise awareness to bullying in the workplace, to raise awareness to imposter syndrome. If it happened to me, it can happen to anyone. 70% of women experience it. You're normal, you're okay, it's part of it. You're losing energy. Now, how can you start building up? And that's when I came across, Tal Ben-Shahar on positive psychology and a term called post-traumatic growth. And very well, right? We all know about post-traumatic stress disorder. When I left, I had somewhat of a post-traumatic stress disorder. I went to interviews, and every time I felt some political kind of, I ran 1,000 miles, I had PTSD. But then I learned about post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is when you're able to actually understand your pain and utilize even your pain as your purpose. How do you turn pain into purpose? Because we all experience pain somewhere in our life. And sadly, today more than ever, right? People are experiencing pain. And sometimes actually it's that pain that used well can be an amazing driving force. So for me, I didn't want anyone to experience that pain again. And that became a driving force to do what I do today, to go study organizational psychology and then work, with organizations. But I share that because I really believe we all have pain somewhere in our background. And, the difference between, sadness and depression, sadness is normal, right? Sadness, who doesn't have negative emotions? Only psychopath or dead people, says our friend, right? Sadness is normal. Depression is sadness without hope. And I think, even in the lowest possible moments, really understanding that you can turn around that pain, that you can utilize that pain, that there is hope, that there are, the world is still, and, I get punched every day, especially where I'm located, the world has gone crazy completely, right? And at one stage I said, what does Lead Like a Girl have to do with everything that's happening now? But I realize it's even more important today than ever before, because we're seeing too much of the toxic masculinity, and I'm talking the workplace, don't get me started on politics, but everywhere. We need a new type of leadership, okay?
Yes.
We need, at the end of the day, it's about delivering results, right? But we're wearing down our people by the toxic masculinity. We need a complete reshape. We're not in the 70s. In the new era of leadership, it's human-led leadership. That's what drives results. All data shows. Take care of your people, the business takes care of itself. Focus on the numbers, screw your people, the numbers will drop. And it's as simple as that.
Yes, I'm going to throw up here what Gary said. Pain and purpose sit on each end of the seesaw. And Jerry was talking in the comments about how desensitization is normal as well. It is part of our coping mechanism.
Yeah.
And so, again, some tips for anybody that's starting to think about what's next for you if you're in a similar situation. One of the key things that Dalia shared was sitting and writing it out, like writing out her story and choosing to share with people that she really trusted to give her another view on her situation, which then allowed her to reclaim her strengths and really decide to stand firm in who she wanted to be. Because at the end of the day, that is what we have control over. We
Yeah.
have control over our agency, how we choose to show up
Yeah.
each day and who we choose to be for the people around us. And I applaud you for, I mean, that instinct to shelter your team and not get them caught up in his his negativity, in the kind of drama that he was creating that wasn't really helpful.
You know, the
to
interesting thing for leaders in general, right? 2 months before I left, I actually worked with HR and we led a culture evaluation company-wide, right? And it's just amazing how one rotten apple, influences the culture. So the global Asia culture was kind of low, but then, my pride and joy is my team culture was extremely high. You're able to shield, but it cost me my health, right? So I think, yes, that's your role as a leader, right, to protect your team. But your role, I think, looking back, I think I stayed there for too long, right? Being numb. What I always say, if I would have left immediately, I also would have carried around this sense of failure. I think don't leave immediately, stay 6 months, okay? And ask yourself at the end of your six months, am I able to bring my strengths to work? If the answer is no, then you need to change something around this. It's not they don't deserve you, walk away, right? And you talked before about, this emotional detachment. I think that's such a brilliant concept because I like to use, I was in Singapore at the time, and I like to use an analogy in the Singaporean botanical gardens is like a waterfall, but behind the waterfall, there's a cave. And that's really exactly it. When you're in the waterfall, you're in the situation, the emotions are kind of falling on your head, right? The anger, the frustration, the humiliation, everything, you're in the waterfall. The objective is to go into that cave behind the waterfall. And only when I went to Cincinnati for this kind of alumni retreat, that was the emotional detachment that I was able, it's not that I didn't have these emotions, but I was able to say, I have anger, versus I am anger, right? Stepping back from this waterfall and understanding what the hell was going on. And it took me, don't get me wrong, it took me, then I went to research it, and I actually went and interviewed my peers to try and understand this phenomena of imposter syndrome and, bullying, and I did my thesis on it. There was a lot of sense making, almost 3 years, spending and understanding what was going on. And of course, I was part of it. I was part of this dance of death because, if you're not fighting, if you're not playing this game, you're not in it. So, part of the things would say, sorry, sir, you're not going to talk to me like that. I'm going to leave and come back when you're ready to have a respectful conversation. Basta. I'm not even engaging in this play of yours, right? And I think that's one thing, I learned the hard way that there's only one strategy that works, and that's zero tolerance. And zero tolerance is not, taking it in or humor or whatever. It's literally zero tolerance. No, it's not going to happen. So that was another tip.
Well, and there's so many stories that we tell ourselves that get in the way of our ability to give ourselves permission to do that. And I wish we had time to even dig deeper. So maybe you'll have to come back and we'll have to get into that in part 2, Dalia. But this has been a masterclass in really, I think, helping people recognize and uncover and giving some pathway forward. Because like you said, imposter syndrome is something that shows up for all of us. Even if you're not being bullied by somebody, you are still going to have these moments of imposter syndrome, and being able to recognize them and again, reset. It is about your own personal mental reset. You have capacity for that. And you can also ask for help with others around you. It's why people go to coaches. It's where they lean into mentors. These are all people that can help you in these moments.
And I will say, I mean, we are so much stronger together. And I think one of the things that he did really well was also create silos. And, I happened to be kind of, everyone was kind of fending for themselves. And when I interviewed them, they all were kind of, in a similar situation. My HR changed like maybe 4 times. Only the last one was kind of, if I was able to partner with her earlier. So I think asking for help is so important. And if you don't have it within the company, externally. I did have a coach, it was interesting, and a brilliant coach. And I realized, a lot of what she was saying landed only when I was in this sense making, because I was in the waterfall, right? So also having someone external like my boss saying, Dalia, you're normal, okay? He is a bully, right? And just go, right? They don't deserve you, is also extremely helpful. So yes, asking for help and coming together, because if we had more kind of partners, we would have said, no, we're not accepting this behavior. It's against our company PVPs. So this is also a word for anyone out there. 1 in 4 of us experience bullying. So yes, speak up. But all the others, you see something going on, speak up. And I worked with a group of women, in Australia, and I shared this story that I think it was Clinton. No, it was Obama's administration, and they only had, 20% women. And one of the things, they started being hype girl for each other and supporting each other. And at some stage, and also McKinsey research shows that women are cut mid-sentence more often, and they would literally step in and say, let her finish, right? Oh, I heard Rita, I saw Rita, you were cut off mid-sentence. What did you want to say? And slowly, they really led to a cultural kind of, so I like to use, lift others as you rise, step in for others, because together we have, the power to change. And, today when everything around us seems so dark, I would just, say another kind of thoughts, that I also learned that you can't fight darkness, and that's what I was trying to do. All you can do is focus on yourself to increase your light, because darkness doesn't exist. Darkness is the absence of light. So if you're shining your light as bright as possible, the darkness will shrink. So that's kind of.
I love that. That is the perfect way to end this. And Dare to Lead Like a Girl. Get Dalia's book. If you are with us and you agree that we want more human-centered leadership, where we have this balance of our masculine and feminine strength showing up in ways that really allow people to bring their fullest selves every day, so that your business can achieve its fullest goals. That's what it's all about. And her book I can't give enough praise for the book. The book is very easy to read. You'll be entertained as you read, but you'll also take away a lot of really easy to implement great nuggets too.
Thank you so
Dalia,
much.
you've been a joy. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to Jerry and Gary and Bobby and everyone else who joined us in the comments. So happy to have you with us, and come back again next week. Ellen at Serrano is joining me next week, and we're going to talk about making big leaps in your life and overcoming fear and resistance. And we're going to stay in some of the theme that we have been in today, and you won't want to miss it. Dalia, you are a joy. Thanks for being here. I see everyone again soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining us. If you love this episode, leave us those 5 stars, and be sure to share this with a friend. And if you didn't, don't worry about it. See you back here next week.